Well, good morning. Thanks for coming out. My name is Tim Phillips. I'm president of Americans for Prosperity. We're encouraged by where the Senate is at this point. We look at what the Budget Committee did just yesterday, what the Finance Committee did before Thanksgiving. We think this is on the right track. There are always going to be obstacles, but the key for us is making sure that the focus is on creating sustained economic growth, the kind of growth that can lift up Americans and bring this economy to where it needs to be. So we're encouraged by what's happening. We know there are always going to be obstacles. I think about the current trigger idea. We think it's a bad idea. We were clear in that yesterday, but we do see a path forward. We're optimistic, and we think this is going to get done. I'd like to introduce Senator David Perdue, a good friend of ours from Georgia. David?
Well, thank you, Tim, and I really appreciate all the support that you guys have given us in this exercise. This is a historic day, a historic week, and I want to thank Americans for Prosperity, the Freedom Partners, Generation Opportunity, and the Libra Initiative for being here today, and thank you all for what you've done to get us here. Their input over the last few weeks and months has been absolutely instrumental. Let's talk about what we're doing. What we're trying to do is to make America competitive again. And to do that, one of the ways you do it is to fix the tax code. There are three pieces of this tax code that we're endeavoring to change. One is on the individual side. Two is the corporate rate to become more competitive with the rest of the world. And three is to eliminate our archaic repatriation tax. On the individual side, there's been a lot of talk that, oh, well, the rich are getting all the benefits and so forth. Let me give you a couple of numbers. A median income family that makes $73,000 a year, that's a husband, a wife. This is a nuclear family, and we've got other examples as well. Two kids making $73,000 a year are going to get a 60% tax cut. That's reality. An individual making the same median income of about $41,000 for an individual is going to get about a 75% tax cut. And these examples go on. And what this does, this helps us grow the economy. The reason growing the economy is so important is that long term we have to solve this debt crisis. And cutting taxes and changing the tax code will not solve the debt crisis, but the debt crisis will not be solved unless and until we fix our archaic tax policy. This is a historic moment, and I want to thank everybody for their work in this. And now I'm going to introduce my good friend Thom Tillis from North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, David, Tim, and all the partners that are here today, and good morning. We spend a lot of time when we're talking about the tax plan to quote GDP, basis points, growth rates, and everything else. So I try to really focus on the human side of things. And there were two things that happened yesterday that I thought were worth sharing today. One was a reporter came up to me and said, Senator, how do you respond to the fact that people making $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 are going to be paying more in taxes? I say that's patently untrue on the whole. You know, if you look at some sort of detailed circumstance, maybe there's something that we need to work out once we see the implementation of the tax plan. He says, does that mean you got to read it before you know what's in it? I said, no, and you need to understand tax policy. And I know that you don't because you've never done it, which relates to my second experience of yesterday. I was on a Skype session, a 30-minute session with an elementary school class down in North Carolina. I had a little boy, it was English as a second language class. And I had a little boy ask me a question about what's the bill or what was the legislation that I was most proud of that I had something to do with. I was Speaker of the House in North Carolina during the financial crisis. I took the gavel in 2011. And I said the thing that and I'm trying to explain this to a little boy I believe is in 4th grade. And so I was trying to use terms that he could understand. I said it was something that I did that let your moms and fathers have more money to pay bills, to send you to school, to actually make ends meet. It's called a tax reform bill, but what it was something that put more money in the pocketbooks of Americans and working families. It gave you a better opportunity to get a job when you get out of school, and it gave my state an opportunity to go from one of the worst performing states in the nation to one of the top performing states in the nation. In an abstract, this tax plan is very similar to what we did in North Carolina. Lowering the corporate tax rate, making it more competitive with our competitors, the southeastern states, and lowering the individual income rates. We had the same criticisms waged at our bill. We had the liberal media up in Raleigh and Charlotte say that this was going to be devastating to poor families. Take a look at the facts now and look at whether or not these liberal outlets are saying anything negative about the bill. We have lifted people out of poverty. We have established rainy day funds that are at historic levels. We've got job creation numbers, and we've got median income increases in North Carolina that are exactly what's going to happen when we pass this bill. That's why I fully support it. I do share concerns with some of the suggestions for changes. We'll work through them, though. I think we're going to have a good tax bill. We'll get it to the House. We'll get it to the President's desk. And the American people will ultimately see, and the families and the parents of that kid, like the one I talked to yesterday in North Carolina, are going to see the tremendous results because we've seen it in North Carolina. We're going to see it here. Now I want to pass it over to my friend and colleague, Dean Heller.
Thank you, Tom. Well, it certainly is a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. I want to thank them for their hard work and effort, but I also want to thank American for Prosperity. White House here, I see some of my former employees that are here that now work over at the administration. Great to see all of them. Freedom Partners, Generation Opportunity, and also the Libra initiative, which I will be addressing on Saturday when I get back to Las Vegas. So we're kind of at a pivotal point here in Washington, D.C. I think today we have a pretty good vote. Motion to proceed on our tax reform. Now, you all know I'm from Las Vegas, and in Nevada, you put $100 down. And if I'm going to put $100 down today, I'm going to bet that the motion to proceed passes, and we'll be well on our way to give tax reform to the American people as we move forward. And let me tell you why it's important, especially for my state of Nevada. The median household income today is $7,000 lower than it was 10 years ago. Think about that. For the average family, it's $7,000 less in purchasing power than they had 10 years ago. The average Nevada family is living paycheck to paycheck. In fact, there are more Nevadans living paycheck to paycheck today than probably most other states. These are some of the reasons and the important reasons to me as to why tax reform needs to happen. Child care has skyrocketed also in the same time over this 10-year period, about $10,000 per child. And so one of the initiatives, on top of obviously lowering rates and other things, is to make sure that we get a child tax credit and double that child tax credit to about $2,000 per child. Why is this important? If you're a family and you have several children, it'll probably pay for your food bill for probably 3 months. This child tax credit alone, 3 months, or perhaps even buy about 9,000 diapers. So you can imagine the impact that a child tax credit doubling will have. Also, doubling the standard deduction. All of this will help the average family. Also, this initiative that we have that hopefully we'll see some progress not only today but tomorrow will create about 8,300 jobs in the state of Nevada. And I just want to make the point that as I was growing up, I had 5 brothers and sisters, and my father was a mechanic. My mother was a school cook. And an average family could live off of those incomes. What they told their children at that time was that if you worked hard and you played by the rules, you'd be able to succeed. I do believe that the average American after the last 10 years doesn't believe that that's true anymore. And that's the goal behind this initiative. That's the goal behind this tax reform, is to give the kind of relief that the middle-class family have been asking for, begging for the last generation, and we're going to provide that to them. So I look forward to this. I look forward to today's vote. Again, my $100 is down on the bill passing. But also, or the motion passing, but also to make sure that we give the kind of relief that the average family needs, and frankly, the average American family deserves. So thank you very much for that, and I'd like to move it over to James Davis now from Freedom Partners.
Thank you. What is this about, really? It's about helping people improve their lives. That's what tax reform can do. That's the power that it has. The current system, the status quo, has led to a divide in our country of those where the politically connected and the wealthy have been able to get ahead with an army of lobbyists, with taking advantage of all the exemptions and deductions and really manipulating and maneuvering the system. So in 2016, when the exit polls said that 72% of Americans felt like the economy was rigged against them, they were right. That's true. We've continued to poll on that, and we've seen that that is the overwhelming feeling today. So I'd give the Congress and the White House a lot of kudos for the work that they've done so far to advance legislation and a framework that is consistent, that simplifies the tax code, that works for everyday Americans, that treats people more fairly and equally across the board. We now have an opportunity where Congress isn't adding more corporate welfare to our tax code. That's the first time we can say that in Washington in a really long time. Instead, they've taken from that. Right? They've taken some of the corporate welfare out and created a more equal, level playing field. We think there's a lot left that can be done, but this is a giant step in the right direction. And so we urge members of Congress to step up and support the legislation and to help people improve their lives, creating economic growth that will lead to higher wages, more jobs, more prosperity for our country moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it to Carrie Sheffield, Executive Director for Generation Opportunity, who this is a critical constituency who will benefit from this kind of economic growth.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm short. Hope you can hear me. Hello, I'm Carrie Sheffield, Executive Director of Generation Opportunity. We are building a digital grassroots army of millennials and young people. We are the innovators. We are the entrepreneurs. We are the leaders. We're going to be running the show here in a few years. Just give us some time. I want to thank the senators here in this room, and I want to thank the senators on the Senate Budget Committee for giving us back our freedom, for protecting us from Bernie Sanders and those liberal progressives who would steal our American dream. This is our dream. Millennials, we have created the most innovative and entrepreneurial class ever seen in human history. We created the innovations like Airbnb, like Uber, like Facebook. We created all these things to make life better for everyone. And these tax reforms, as this chart shows, will create more revenue, more growth, and more opportunity for everyone, especially for my generation. Now, I know the Bernie Sanders of the world, which sadly has captivated a lot of my peers. He sounds nice, it sounds attractive, but the reality is he doesn't actually understand the struggle. He doesn't understand people like me where I came from. I came from a family where I grew up in a trailer park. I grew up in a motorhome. My brother was born in a tent. I know what poverty tastes like, and I know the one thing my parents told me was that the American dream meant that my circumstances did not dictate the outcome of my birth. And I knew that if I worked hard, and I did work hard, I got a full scholarship to Harvard on merit. I was able to start my own business. And I was able to do these things not because of Bernie Sanders. I got these things because of my ability to pursue my American dream. And thank you, senators here, for protecting me from the Bernie Sanders of the world who would take that American dream. My generation, we aspire to create businesses. 2/3 of us aspire to create our own business. These reforms, this tax reform, will allow us to do that. It will allow us to create more jobs. It will allow us to take home more pay that we have earned. So thank you so much for standing up and for protecting our generation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel Garza from the Libre Initiative.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Garza, President of the Libre Initiative. I'm proud to stand here with Senator Tillis, Senator Perdue, and Senator Heller. To have a thriving Latino community, you need a thriving America. And to have a thriving America, you need a thriving Latino community. That means we need productivity. We need growth in jobs, growth in opportunity. And this tax plan does that. I'm reminded of my dad, actually. When we were young, working in the fields, in the orchards of Nebraska, and California, and the state of Washington, Dad took his life savings, and he bought a business. This is back in '81. It was a small hotel in the small town of Toppenish, Washington. And we struggled for the first couple of years. We were in the red, and a lot of it had to do with local, county, state, and federal taxes. Ronald Reagan came around. '81 passed the tax relief in the first round. By '83, Dad had turned that business around. The thing about that, in a very real way, is that when we first bought that motel, we thought, that's it, we're out of the fields. This is our ticket out of the orchards. But for the next 2 years, we actually had to work in the orchards to sustain the business. And Dad needed that break, and he got that break. And today, 4 million Latinos own small businesses across America, and a lot of them are struggling. In fact, half of them don't make it past 5 years, and only a third of them make it past 10 years. They need a break. They need a tax relief. We have centralized so much money and so much power and control in Washington, D.C. And Latinos nowadays, instead of thriving, the only people they see thriving are the political and the bureaucratic class here in Washington. It's time to return a lot of that money back to the pockets of Latinos so they can create opportunity. They can create jobs. They can prosper and create wealth. Today, there are 15 million Latinos who make over $50,000 a year. There's 60 million of us. So we have a long way to go before the Latino community can reach a level of prosperity that is in line with the rest of Americans. Because of the mandate on Obamacare, over 8 million have had to pay the fine. In California alone, 800,000 have paid that fine. And the vast majority of them, 80%, make under $50,000 a year who pay that fine. Those are Latinos. We're getting hammered by regulation, by mandates, by the burdensome taxes that are being imposed on their businesses and on families. And this tax plan will double the child tax credit, will double the deductible for individuals and married couples, some relief on the pass-through, and relief on the corporate plan. So we're proud to stand behind it, and I'm proud to stand with these senators and congratulate them on the work that they're doing. It's urgent that we get it passed for relief for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for all the speakers here, particularly those from Freedom Partners, Americans for Prosperity, Generation Opportunity, and the Libra Foundation, again, for their support and help. We've got time for a couple of questions. Yes, sir.
I actually have a question for Senator Heller, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Senator, obviously, of all the senators here, you're facing re-election in 2018. How important do you think it is to get tax reform done before your campaign gets going next year?
Well, I can give you a lot of reasons why getting tax reform done is important, and outside my campaign itself, I believe the ultimate reason and the purpose is to help the average middle-class family. If you stop and think about what's going on there, look at where this economy and what this economy is doing right now. And what we want to do is for this economy to continue the kind of growth that we're seeing. And we had a 25% increase in the stock market since November of last year, 25%. And that's a lot of pension funds. That's a lot of 401ks. People, average families, are doing better off today in the last year than they were doing 10 years prior to that. And we just want this to continue. That's what this is all about, is to make sure that the average middle-class family is doing better. Take a look at Cyber Monday. Cyber Monday just 2 days ago. $1 billion more this year than last year. That's because people are spending money. And they're willing to go online and spend money. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Because they feel confident that this Congress is going to do something that helps them, that serves them, that makes them better off. And that's what this initiative, that's what this tax reform bill is all about, is to keep that momentum going well into the future, so that we're not looking at some anemic growth of 1.8, 1.9%. We've seen the last couple of months north of 3%, and with this White House, they want it north of somewhere between 3 to 4% over the sustainable future. So yeah, there's political implications to this, but it's not nearly as important as the impact that it has on the average American family.
Yes.
I'd like to ask each of the senators what your stance is on the idea of fiscal trigger, and if it's something that you believe could potentially, you would oppose the bill, the tax bill, if fiscal trigger was
I think the suggestion of a trigger is well-intentioned in that they're worried about whether the estimates for growth are going to be met, and if they don't, then you could possibly have revenues to offset it. But I don't think it's necessary. I think if you take a look at the fact that we're talking about a sustained incremental GDP growth of 0.4%, 40 basis points, that we've built in enough conservatism that we don't need the trigger. The other issue with the trigger that concerns me Because we had a trigger in North Carolina, but we had a trigger going a different direction. Our trigger said that if we overachieved our revenue, then the taxes automatically went down. So we went from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3, and I believe that they're about to go to 2.5%. Now we've gone to one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the nation for a state that has corporate taxes. So I think we've been conservative with the economic expansion numbers. I believe if we put a trigger in there that could potentially say at some point on the horizon over 10 years that your taxes will increase, then the market will not respond as favorably because you've narrowed the horizon for possible, for making a decision about capital deployment, and you've created uncertainty. And any time you limit the length of time that you can make a business decision and you create uncertainty, you will dramatically impact the perverse consequence of having a trigger in here could potentially be that we won't achieve the economic gains that we would otherwise have if the trigger were not. And so that's the discussion we're going. I think that the concern is well-intentioned, but I don't know that it's well-founded.
You want to add anything? No, we're good. Yes.
I guess this is for everyone. Are you guys opposed then to Senator Johnson and Senator Daines' changes on pass-throughs?
Senator Johnson is a friend and ally, and he's been someone who on really just about every issue is a champion. And so his efforts are absolutely welcome and well-intentioned. We feel good about the Senate bill where it is. It's a good bill. No bill is perfect, and you can always make something as complex as tax reform and tax cuts better. But it's a good bill, and we're urging the Senate to pass it this week and to get it done.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
If you don't mind, yeah, I think, and it goes back to what I said in my opening comments. I think that Senator Johnson is concerned with a group of people who are currently pass-through entities that as you move up the size of a pass-through entity may end up having a greater spread between the C Corps and the S Corps. I think we should look at it and possibly discuss something in conference that will address it based on real models. But it reminds me of the discussion that I had yesterday with that reporter who was basically saying that everybody at every economic strata were going to pay more in personal income taxes. It's patently untrue. And so I think what we have to do is just figure out where the models take us and also recognize that next year when we do another reconciliation bill, if we identify, and through more modeling, we identify areas that we need to make adjustments, we make them. That's what we did in North Carolina, and that's why the tax reforms have had an enduring value. But you don't get to have that discussion about fixing maybe some of the unintended consequences and some things that were not quite what you wanted unless you start. And you start by voting for this bill and sending it to the President's desk.
Yes, sir.
Senator Heller mentioned 25% rise in the market, 3% economic growth since last November. Do you see that as coincidental with the achievements of the current president?
I do not.
Especially in yesterday's tweet that resulted in him sitting between 200 chairs.
Yeah, I do not. There are 2 points you raised there. First, what's going on with the economy? I'm not an economist, but you look at the writings of both liberal economists and conservative. Right now, in my humble opinion, as a business guy who's done this for 45 years, when you talk about deregulating to the point that we've done this year, 860 regulations have been reversed already this year, rules and regulations. That has a dramatic impact on the optimism out there. Consumer confidence right now is at a 16-year high. Some studies actually say this is the highest number they've ever measured. CEO confidence is also at a 20-year high. Why? Because of the expectation of regulatory relief on those draconian regulations that suck the very life out of this free enterprise system over the last decade, and on the hope that we will bring some intelligent reform to this archaic tax policy that we've had for 30 years.
Sorry, I can tell you from our network's point of view, the President has offered wonderful leadership on tax reform. You go back to February, he began pulling in outside groups, Senate leadership, individual Senate and House members. This administration has provided great leadership, and the set of principles they released back in April, they were good ones, and we immediately embraced them at Americans for Prosperity because they were good. They would lead to sustained growth, simplification, lower rates across the board, and they've continued to offer good leadership. They've been a wonderful leader on this, including the President himself.
Senator Heller, could you address that?
Yeah.
Sure.
I worked in the securities industry for a number of years while I was in college, and when I first got out, I was a broker on the Pacific Stock Exchange, so I watched markets go up and down, and am convinced that 50% of the activity in the markets is financial, the other 50% is emotional. And I believe that that's where we are right now. I think the American people, and Senator Perdue talked about the confidence level that we have out there. Right now, the emotional level is very high. They believe that this Congress is going to do what they said they're going to do, and that is tax reform, and that's also to reverse the Affordable Care Act. Those are the two principles I think that we're standing in front of the American people today and discussing, and that gives a lot of confidence to a lot of people. Individuals, small businesses, and large businesses see the change coming through the changes we've already done through reversing some of these regulations, onerous regulations, in the 11th hour of the previous administration. But moving forward, there's no doubt that this White House has a business mind, and they want to move this economy forward. And it's playing out in the stock market today, and has played out in the last 12 months. And that's why I see us up 25%.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Tim, earlier you said that trigger would be a bad idea, but you saw a path forward. Can you kind of talk about what that path is? And then Senator Teller and Perdue, if you could maybe follow up one-on-one that Senator Tillis said about the trigger concept.
Josh, we do think it's a bad idea. The last thing you'd want to do if there were some kind of downturn, economic downturn, would be to raise taxes. It also leads to uncertainty for businesses. If you don't know what your tax rate's going to be at any given month or year, then it's difficult to plan and do the things you need to do to create jobs and generate growth and provide services to people. At the same time, the senators and the House did the same thing. They're looking to get to yes. It's the most unified effort I've seen on any issue in many years, from Republicans in the House and the Senate and the President, the administration. And when you have that kind of unity and a desire to genuinely move forward, there's usually a way to find a way to get it done. And that's something that I believe has set aside this, or has differentiated this tax reform effort from really any issue they focused on this year. Has been an ability to seek to get to yes, because they know the stakes for individual Americans, for this economy, and for our nation.
As a member of the Finance Committee that went through this process from beginning to end, I've heard from small businesses to large businesses, not only in the state of Nevada, but across the country. And there's one word. It's called certainty. For 10 years, we're to provide certainty to these businesses so they can invest their capital and make the kind of investments necessary to create jobs and to increase wages. And you can't do that with that level of uncertainty. So personally, I don't support triggers. Do not support triggers. I think it takes away the kind of certainty that we have put in this bill through the efforts of the Finance Committee over the last 3 months.
Please.
I would add, if you're talking about revenue and the triggers discussion here, CBO put out that 1% growth would equate to $270 billion over the course of 10 years. We're looking at trying to get back or exceed the average growth of 3% GDP, which would give you more than $1 trillion over 10 years. Plus, there are other areas where you can look at to claw back corporate welfare. Like I said before, this has been a good step forward in that process through the legislative process that the House and the Senate put forward, but you can still make some gains there as you move forward as well. So focusing on economic growth is a tremendous part of what we should be looking at rather than looking at the trigger solution.
We're not pro-trigger. We don't like trigger warnings around here. No, I think in terms of trigger, I think they kind of go against the millennial ethos, which is we like flexibility. We understand the gig economy. We understand that to create a career or an economy more broadly, we need the ability to adapt to circumstances. So I think triggers kind of run counter to that.
I'll address the question and we'll end the session here. Look, I'm in business. I'm one of those guys that needed that certainty to make capital investment decisions over a longer period of time. I personally would prefer not to have a trigger, but as Tim Phillips just said, this is about getting a deal done, getting a tax package for the American people, which they expect. And I come from a world where you really don't ever get 100% of what you want. And I don't want to see this bill destroyed because of pursuit for perfection. And I think we've seen that before up here. And I'm hopeful that I'm optimistic, actually, that we'll find a common ground here that will satisfy the people who are concerned about the growth. I'm really not concerned about the growth. 0.4% of GDP growth will more than pay for this. And I happen to believe that that's already happening, if for no other reason than the regulatory relief that's being given out there. So I've been working with the people who have concerns about that behind the scenes, and I think that we're going to get to common ground and get this bill passed. Thank you all for your interest. I really appreciate you being here today, and thank for all of our speakers. Thank you.
Hey, great comments. Thank you. Appreciate it.